as any artist does, you begin to notice patterns and resonances and things that are trying to connect inwardly first before they can connect outwardly first. And of course, mediumship is all about connecting in some kind of a way. And also, in my experience, everyone has mediumship tendencies or whatever you want to call it, but you have these tendencies of communicating, sharing, and exchanging all kinds of information, whether it's artistic or musical or literature or poetry, whatever, it's inspiration, it's in spirit. You're sort of doing that. So I don't want, I have a lot of art training since I was 6 years old with some very advanced teachers now that I look back. And for some reason, they wouldn't take on students, but they took on me for some reason. So I watched them and absorbed, because when you're a small child, you're sort of watching how the adults are doing things that you're more conscious of what they're doing than they're conscious of what they're doing. And then I noticed that certain artists I worked with kind of went into an altered state of some kind or a non-ordinary state of consciousness, not necessarily trance. And anyone who's sort of been in communities of artists would probably get that right away and understand what I'm talking about. So if you can understand that, at least you're well on your way to being receptive to all kinds of things, whether it's you're just out walking in the woods and you're receptive to the spirits of birds and the wind and the breezes somehow are communicating to you and they inspire you to try to communicate back by producing an image. It's all part of it. And it was happening with me way before I was aware of what was happening. One of my fine arts studio degrees, way back when, the teacher was one of my mentors in so many ways and still is. And I, unlike everyone else there, I was beginning to produce abstract expressionist art, but it had patterns to it and it spoke to people and had hidden things in it that I didn't intend. And that was sort of my response to it, because when I stopped responding to everyone around me, looking at what they were doing or what they weren't doing, or looking at books, when I just forgot about everyone else and got into that silent state that you get into, it's almost like something was using my hands with the brush and the paints and making, and so it felt very courageous and crazy at the same time. And my teacher responded in such a positive way, whereas the other students were kind of weirded out by it, but he absolutely loved it. And so that kind of encouragement, that validation, is also part of the process. So, as you know, I recently retired, so to speak, as a psychotherapist of 35 years or more. And so now I have much more time to return to my painting. And so I started returning to my painting 2 years ago as I was titrating or transitioning down from the practice. And as a medium, I've had a lot of experiences, formally and informally, when I was a child and an adult, with what people might like to call nature spirits. And so there's a big difference between connecting with nature spirits and producing art with them than there is with someone who's not a nature spirit, like a human being who was a human being. There's a big difference in that. So when I started painting again, the nature spirits that I'm always in touch with are extremely playful, like little children, and very curious, and like to play tricks and do all kinds of things. They just like to get very messy. And unlike human beings who may be in spirit, they don't ask for permission. Like, can I come forward to do this? They just come in and do whatever they want. And I was perfectly happy with that. And so I started reproducing what looked like abstract images, but they were very complex and they took days to do in a medium that I was very familiar with, which was watercolor. And somehow they led me to look through an old drawer, and I found some old inks from Paris that were scented inks, very old. And I'd use them, to write romantic letters and things back in the days. And so I was using it. And then the smell of the ink was so invigorating and the colors were so intense that I started using more and more ink rather than watercolor. And I didn't want to ruin my brushes with ink because I didn't know very much about ink, which is very different. So I started using little laboratory pipettes that you kind of squeeze and pick up. And so all of my work, which you look, hardly any of it, none of it is with brushes, which might be hard to believe. And this was a medium that the spirits were able to really get into because water is so hard to control. You're just working with water and air, and ink is mostly water and dye. And just like trying to be a medium, like you can't control this stuff, it just flows. And so somehow the water became a medium with a medium in some way. And just so for me, that was a natural way of just producing it. And it went on for maybe a year, produced quite a lot of stuff as my familiarity with the materials grew and techniques came out of it, and I had to discover all kinds of new materials and techniques and paper and tape and um, uh, blow dryers and things, all kinds of things that just took a long time to do, very involved in it. And one day, as I was just working on some of this very intense and focused in that way, I I felt something very different, that it was a person, a human in spirit who was noticing me, who had noticed, like was attracted to the work and was noticing it. And I could feel them noticing it. And it turned out to be, at first he was quite confused in some certain ways. Like so this is William Hurt, the actor, right? And whom I have always had an extremely deeply affection for. And we have a lot of similarities in our love for all things French, and also what I just, this is sort of jumping ahead, what I have discovered so far is that the person in spirit who connects with me somehow has or has had a connection with me in some way when they were here on earth. So I still don't know what that connection with him is. It could be with one of his kids or someone living in Manhattan for as long as I do. You always have the sixth degree of connection with someone, like, you know, everyone knows Kevin Bacon, that kind of thing. So it could be very well that. But we resonated, and he's also a Pisces as well, and so we just resonated very much. And he had always wanted to do art. He actually did paintings, which people don't know too much about, and so I invited him. I said, so let's see what we can do. And so as a subject, we chose, and this is my guides also were very much a part of this. And so they said, we'll set the stage. We actually helped him come through, and we're going to make some suggestions as how to proceed in terms of subject matter. And so this will help him because, as I said before, he was kind of confused still. This is only maybe a year after his transition, which had been very, very painful. And he had tried to resist drugs because he was sober, which could be because I've been sober for a couple of decades. So that could also be our connection as well, too. So it was decided that he would try to express what he experienced during his transition, that there were stages. We sort of put it up in stages because he couldn't remember anything. But then and he was afraid to go back in and explore it. And so his guides are saying, well, so this art will help him go back and explore it. And you are supporting him by kind of still your connection to earth in a certain way. And so we produced these incredible pieces of art for me, quite small, maybe no bigger than 6 by 9 inches on watercolor paper, but with just inks, and he titled them in French, which my French is not so great. So it took me a while to figure out what he was saying, but like poetry, just beautiful titles that he gave it to experience. And we painted his pain, we painted his confusion, we painted his awakening, we painted his awareness of his surroundings as he woke up. And this is all this helped him a great deal, as many. And it also opened up a lot of channels for me, and it began to attract other people who were well-known best friends in my life that had transitioned early in life, and they were all artists. And so One was an actor and one was a painter. And so they came, finally, they stepped forward and they said, we want to do this too. And so we produced a series with them as well.
And
Yeah.
I've tried to stay really quiet because I love this stream of the story.
Okay.
So if you're okay with just continuing to the progression onto, whatever the number of steps, but just want to let you know, you talked early on about state, the state that you get into for this, and that's such a big part of what I'm having this class about,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
I mean, the whole series is about, and I'm calling it flow state, but you can nitpick on terminology, but it's
Yeah.
very much about getting people into that sort of loss of time, open, receptive, you know,
Right. No ego. Right.
right.
There's no goal or plan or
Yes.
performance involved other than for
And
the
you,
sheer pleasure of what you're doing.
exactly. And the other thing you said, like you said, it's just giving me chills because you also talked about the nature spirits having this very childlike, playful. And that's another thing. Like my last class, I'm like, you were, you were going to be creating like a child. And of course, I talk about the Picasso quote of him, saying that he spent a lifetime learning to create art like a child again.
Yeah.
But I'm trying to get them into this non-judgmental, exploratory state of mind, right? So you've hit
Yes.
on all of these things
Okay, well,
already.
good, good.
Yes,
Well, even
I'm
it
excited.
reminds me when I still remember being in the studio at university for this, when I produced this first abstract painting, if that's what you want to call it. I was just looking at the blank canvas in an easel, like 2 in the morning, alone in the studio. And I don't know, but suddenly I was just because the painting I produced before that, I was a newbie and everything, and it sucked, and I was kind of embarrassed by it. But I was just exasperated, and I just picked up the brush and my palette, and the oil paints on the palette were already pretty wet from a lot of turp and oil that I was using, and I just picked it up and I just splatted it on the canvas out of frustration. I was angry. I just and when I looked at that splat, it opened up something. It was like this, like someone had opened their mouth and sang a note. It was just like this splat. Suddenly, it went in this direction, and it was a nature spirit kind of thing. It was trickish and angry and boastful and playful and didn't give a shit about what anyone thought. And when I just looked at it, it gave me instructions. The splat just gave me instructions what to do next. I just followed. It had this momentum kind of a thing, and that's what these paintings. There's like this momentum, this flow, as you call it. I call it a pulsating murmur
Oh, I like that.
that and some people call it vibration. I call it pulsating murmur because it's speaking to me. It's always going. So also, William Hurt insisted that I call him Bill. He didn't like the name William, so it's
Right.
like
And I
Bill
think
Hurt.
that is what he went by in life. I'm pretty sure he went by Bill,
Yeah,
didn't he?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very good.
So and my friends who were painters or theater people or something who came through and wanted to try this because they never got to really paint the way they wanted to when they were on Earth, and and their paintings were all humorous and funny. They were like little jokes, that private jokes that we had shared, and they said, let's paint that. And one of my friends, a very fine artist, she would title her works with really odd references to literature that nobody knew about, or very odd puns. And so I said, well, let's do that. So we kind of did that. It's just this not just experimenting and exploration, but it's this like going on a carnival ride or something, and to connect with that emotion. The other thing I'll say is that um, one of my pet peeves is when I'm with people, especially friends, and we're going to a gallery or looking at art, or they're looking at my art, is they don't know how to look at art. They're sort of looking at it in a one-dimensional way, and they don't know how to really look at it. And we go to a gallery and they pass by it, and everyone's just passing by all this work. if I find something that speaks to me, I stand in front of it for hours and I'm picking it apart with my eyes. I'm going into it. And just recently, I found something at it was a minimalist exhibition um, in the West Village from a Spanish artist who's been gone for many years. And I noticed things that just didn't make sense in terms of material, and so, because I got so deep into it. And when I tried to talk to the curator and the art historians who are there, they could not even discuss this stuff. They didn't know how to look at the art. And usually by the time that I'm done talking to my friends, there's like 20 people standing around me, like listening to my lecture about. And so your students know how to look at art, how to see it, how to perceive it. Like you have to be able to see these things that no one else can see and stay with it for a long time. And if it's not speaking to you, you leave it alone and then you come back to it and see if it has anything to say before you toss it. Um, and so after my friends, we like, they couldn't stay very long because most of them had been transitioned for quite a few years. And so our relationship had already advanced in terms of my mediumship, where our relationship was more in spirit rather than here. They were done with Earth, and so, and this is just sort of a pleasant surprise that they did with me. And not surprisingly, that it attracted other entities, if you want to call them, in some kind of a way. And so somehow my attention was drawn to the Rorschach blots. I guess I might have been going through some old books on my shelves as I'm like getting rid of stuff and stuff. And I found him very intriguing. And so I did a lot of research on him, and it was hard to find, but I was able to get it out. I was able to get something that his wife had written. And he was one of the most astounding people that I've ever read about or met. That at very early on in life, he was known as an artist. He was a kid. He just drew, drew, drew. And his nickname was Klex, Klex, from his kids. He went to this like boarding school where all the boys had nicknames for each other. And his name was Klex. And a lot of historians say, well, that's because Klex is German slang for blot, which it is, but that's not why they named him Klex. They named him Klex because he was always drawing and painting, um, and something about his personality that maybe only German children could understand. I don't know. And at some point, very early on in his life, he made a major decision, whether to continue on and become a professional artist or go into the newly emerging field of psychiatry, which was all around the time of Freud and Jung and all those people. So it's very exciting times, and being in Switzerland and Vienna and all those places. So at a very early age, he died quite young from unattended appendicitis. Like he was too busy caring for his patients to pay any attention to his physical signs, and it got too late. But he did nothing. Like he loved his children so much, and he was very funny and a trickster. And I found all these photographs of artifacts of puppets that he made for them and drawings. Every morning he would make a drawing for his children before he went off to work, um, and it seems like he never slept because he just wrote paper after paper after paper. And unlike Freud, who wrote most of his papers all coked up, um, Hermann was not. And I don't know how, like, he used time in a very different way. And so suddenly these very interesting aspects and qualities of his spirit, his personality somehow was resonating, and he became attracted to me in some sort of a way. And I had this idea that was on the back burner about the rune stones, that I wanted to somehow do paintings of the rune stones. I didn't want to go, the usual way that people are going to make their own rune stones, or I have a lot of sets of rune stones that people have made for me over the years, but I wanted to somehow express it in art. And he knew about the rune stones. That was kind of a thing, around the Nordic mythology and stuff in his part of the world. But he wasn't interested in it. And I tried to force him to do it with me, and it just wouldn't work. Somehow I relented, and I said, well, then tell me about your blots. So I was able to find, like, you're not able to buy the blots. There's like 10 of them. and they're kind of locked up for ethical reasons, like only professionals are allowed to access them. I don't know if that's true anymore, but somehow he led me to someone who found an original set of them in their garage that their father had left, and they gave them to me. So now I have this original set of the original blots. And whereas people think that his blots were, like you put ink on one side and you fold it over and ta-da, he worked and reworked them over and over again. He painted, like after the blots came, then he went in and he made adjustments and colors and things like that. Took me a while to find that out. Like that's been documented. So it took me 2 months to find the best paper because I went online and all kinds of people were saying, "Oh yeah, we make blots all the time. There's all these videos of blots, and they're all so bad. None of their techniques worked for me. I don't know how they did it, if they were using AI or something." And like they said, this is the best paper. Paper didn't work for me. This is the best ink. Ink didn't work for me. And so it took 2 months of experimenting over and over again with, I have a mountain full of paper right now, different kinds of paper, until finally I found the right paper with the right texture. It's very rough watercolor paper, 140 pound that I like very much, and then inks as well too, because you think, well, it's just black ink that most people use, but black ink either comes as a dye, which is not pigment, and so it dye is very hard to manipulate. And then some of the inks have pigment in them, but a lot of the pigment is very weird, like it's like minerals or something like that. And so it didn't very work very well. And eventually, I have like probably 150 different bottles of ink right here in my little studio from all over the world. And we found one that's produced exclusively in Tasmania, and it's a special kind of very deep, deep, deep blue that almost like tuxedo black blue kind of thing, and that finally worked. So it took 2 months to find all of that before finally, so there were a lot of not failures, but half-hearted attempts, or not just produced to try to get it and to figure out and what to do and what not to do. But once we got going, it wouldn't stop. Like we could do 4 or 5 in an evening, and there were rules about it too. And so that's another thing is like there's physics involved, and it could be metaphysics or something like that. And so the rule was, if we were going to produce a blot that was black but also had color in it, the color part could only be done at night, and the black could only be done in the day. And so there are all kinds of very weird cosmic reasons for that, with the sun and the light and the air, and the way that I'm choosing color is very different at night than when I would choose color during the day, and vice versa. So it's like it took another month like to sort of get that out because it's not working. And so then we came up with this sort of procedure that we would do. And so then I would do the colors at night, and then they would dry enough, and then during the day, then I could do the black. And so it's like that's how they produce in some way. So it's also being open to a lot of weird ideas and having to discard a lot of things that we think we learned in our training or something, and to be willing to take risk and take chances, and not to be afraid to at some point give up and throw it away and start over again as well too. But I saved almost all of the rejects. I'm going to let them sit for another year and then look at them again. And then after, he didn't want to stop. And I'm saying, this is exhausting. And, I'm kind of tired of doing nothing but blots. And so finally he relented and said, okay, now we can do the runes. And it worked perfectly. And they look entirely different from it's same technique, but entirely different. The runes entirely different. But what he wanted to do very, very first of all is he wasn't interested in the runes. He was interested when he was a young medical student in the emerging awareness of the I Ching that was being introduced to the West. And that's around the time when Wilhelm, what's his name, produced the first translation into German. And Jung actually wrote the foreword to this westernized translation of the I Ching. And so it was frowned upon in his cadre of professionals and his colleagues because it was very Eastern and they were still looking for, they liked lots of drugs and chemicals and massages and things like that. Like massage, they might be a little new agey for them, but they were able to do it. But he had this secret passion for the I Ching, and so he sort of felt, like he had to hide it in some kind of a way. And he really couldn't study it, and he didn't know how to if he could integrate it into his work. This is all stuff that's not written down anywhere. This is stuff that he shared with me, and that's how he was produced his blots that was somehow connected with the I Ching in some sort of a way about, throwing the stalks or the coins and suddenly having this kind of very quick, almost abstract, spontaneous thing of the blots. And that's what inspired him in that way. And so that's why he was attracted to me. And that's why when we did the I Ching blots, they worked out so well first. And he wasn't interested in the runes in any kind of way. And at first I thought, well, we should like do an I Ching throw and then produce the paintings. That didn't work. He said, no, just do the paintings and then we'll do the throw and we'll let the universe interpret them. And so that's how it worked. And so it was very in depth. And then I had to record all the information back on every painting. It's like probably between 150 and 200 paintings at this point. So it was a lot of work in that way. And the runes, I just said, I just want to do enough runes so it sort of covers them all if we can. But there were a lot that were repeated. And then after the runes kind of petered out, the nature spirits were watching all of this and they said, we want to do that blot stuff. What perfect thing. So I don't know, like I've been at certain seances and Native American ceremonies where what you call nature spirits show up and you can't control them like you can people. Like they'll bite if you're not careful, and they're very messy. Like if you have, like they like candy, so we would leave candy out for them. They throw the candy all over the place during the seance. And one Native American ceremony, there was like tobacco offerings, like in little pouches that you have to by ritual tie and say a prayer into, and they would untie them and then chew the tobacco and make it very wet and then throw it up and make it stick to the ceiling. Like they're just very, very messy. And so they're very attracted to this blot kind of a thing. And so then we did another Klex, I call them Klex series of nature spirits. And so that's also at the galleries too. You can see there's such a big difference between the runes and the I Chings and the nature spirits. Like it's very, very different.
So give me a little bit of a description of kind of how you became, because I know you said you researched Hermann Rorschach just a little bit. How did you become aware of his then sort of involvement as you went through that process? Because it seems so logical to me that he would have either been drawn to you or that maybe even he was inspiring you at all those earlier steps with regard to media and that sort of thing, knowing that you would get to him. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So how did that awareness come around for you?
Well, through the research that I did, that I was able to find a couple good books and some articles, not very much, but they were very because he couldn't communicate to me in English,
Right.
and it would be lost in if like a translator stepped in, if there's such a thing, it would be lost in it. But he led me to these materials that I could understand that he approved of, and then they gave me all this information, and that was the validation, the connection. He said, yes, that's right, that's right, that's right. And so as we had validation after validation, that's an emotional experience. And that emotional experience is starting to connect the dots, as you say. It's like making, so then this picture starts emerging from it. And the picture actually is a blank canvas, or it's an empty space. Like now we're making space that we know each other well enough that we can sit together in companionship and pleasure and produce these things. And he can feel my pleasure in working with the materials, and I can feel his pleasure in working with materials. So it's this very shared kind of thing. So I'm not like unconscious or or anything that's going on. I'm very conscious, maybe super conscious when it's going on, and it's kind of addicting.
Yeah. Okay, good. Let me think if there's anything else I want you to kind of touch on before we call it quits, because you've given me plenty to work with. In fact, I'm going to do a long form video just for my own satisfaction. But I'll probably do a short form for the class too. Um, because I mean, I'm just going to tell you what's jumping at me is is that he has interacted with you long before you were aware of him. It feels that way to me, whether or not it feels that way to you. I mean, like just the choice of inks early on, because you are, and because you have the shared, background of psychology and being psychoanalyst, that sort of thing, that you were a natural person for him to then to begin to interact even before your awareness hit. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that's
Yeah.
quite accurate. Yeah.
Yeah. And I will say that, I mean, just this is just to share one of my experiences with you. I may have told you about this before. I don't remember. I never know who I've told stuff to. But with regard to spirit portraiture, I had a reading with Suzanne Wilson several years ago now. And she asked me if I was drawing. I said, well, yes, I'm drawing these images that I see in screens of people, and we're finding them to be people's loved ones. And she said, well, yeah, you're doing that, but you're going to be doing just drawing. I'm like, oh, okay. I mean, I'm drawing, but okay. And she asked me if I knew who Coral Polg was. And I didn't at the time. I'd never heard of Coral Polg before. And of course, she told me that, well, she was a spirit artist, spirit portraitist, medium from the UK. Are you familiar with her? Do you know who she
No,
is?
no.
Yeah, well, I hadn't heard of her at that point either. And she says she's here. She's saying she's working with you, and that, yes, she's helping you with this thing you're doing with, but that she really is also working with you for just mediumistic spirit portraiture. And I'm like, okay. And I started working more and more in that direction. I bought a book about Coral Polg. I watched a little short documentary on her. And sure enough, she showed up in direct voice later, and said, who she was and that she was helping me with drawing. And now I've done, I don't know, 20 images that
Mhm.
have been immediately recognized by somebody in the room, you know? um, and it shocks me every time. I mean, like makes my jaw drop. you know, I do this stuff, but I don't, but I'm still like amazed by it. Um, but of course, having been an artist most of my life and, having my art training, I've always recognized that sort of collaborative nature of it coming through you and not always necessarily from you. Yes, I'm kind of intellectually, focused person, but I have noticed long before I, fell into this more spiritual side of things that um, things felt, like you said, inspired, right? Um,
Right. And
uh,
just as first you have to start with a blank surface or space or something. And that's very unique to the creation of art. Like artists know they know what a blank state feels like, a blankness, and they know how to also equate that blank canvas in their mind or their spirit. Like they can become blank and receptive. Um, and they may sit for hours before a blank canvas or a piece of paper, just seeing what's trying to manifest or project itself on that way, and you have to connect with it, and then it's sort of it becomes a collaborative work in some way, whether you recognize it or not.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And that's why when I do spirit portraiture, I say it feels like being a forensic artist. For
Mm-hmm.
me, it feels like being given deep details of information, not the whole face all at once that you're then trying to reproduce. It's like being told or shown one or the other, you know, about the shape of the eye or the wrinkle or the,
Yeah.
the cleft in the chin or the shape of the lip. I mean, like it all comes in bits and pieces, and you end up with a whole image, which hopefully is then representative enough that, and with enough other details that somebody does say, yes, I know who
Hmm.
that is.
Well, there is
Um,
kind of a hidden secret amongst forensic artists, because I know have known a couple, and I could sense like they're doing there's a mediumistic aspect entering into their work, and they know it, but
yes.
they don't talk about it in any kind of way. It's not.
Yes, I was told that in circle, I don't know, several weeks ago. I was told exactly that, that forensic artists are actually receiving subtle
Hmm.
information, and
Hmm.
some of them actually recognize it. So
Hmm.
that's amazing that you said it out loud, because I was given that exact information. I have not gone looking for it. I was
No,
told.
no, it just the other
Yeah.
thing that someone here is trying to get me to express is they keep saying ITC, like they're reminding me ITC, ITC. What do you mean? So that when, and this is directly with Bill's work, when you look at it, you might be able to see it now in this context when I explain it, is that when the water and ink were put in whatever way they were, which is very hard to control. You can't control water, you can't control, but I have found ways of sort of flowing with it, in my own Piscean way. That just in the way that ITC people are able to produce images and things coming out of um, smoke or water, or it's the same thing. There's an ITC process going on there where Bill was able to redirect the water with information to produce the image. It would produce a spontaneous image in the way that he was directing the water in ways that I couldn't direct the water to do. He was able to control the dye in such a way that he would make one dye go this way and one dye go that way, or another blend in ways I couldn't possibly do on purpose. But he was controlling that in a way that we see ITC phenomena happening.
Makes perfect sense. You know how Sonia Rinaldi uses steam, or or other things to
Or people were
have image
using,
show up.
like
Yeah,
Polaroids, or
yeah,
the
absolutely.
photographic medium.
Yeah,
Hmm.
absolutely. That makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Which takes us a whole nother whole nother direction. But no, that's perfect. I love what you've shared with me, and I will, like I said, I'll probably just do two or three forms of this information, and I'll
Sure.
share them with you when they're all said and done.
So if you look at the different galleries and at my website of the different spirit generated paintings, the diversity is stunning. That
Yeah,
it's the same materials,
yeah,
but everyone, it's like these are, you can tell
like
different
different
people
personalities.
produce
Yeah,
these, and that
yeah,
this ink and water, which is so hard to control, if you control it all, has been controlled in some kind of a
yeah,
way.
yeah,
And Rorschach was very helpful in that, because he said it's okay afterwards to refine it. Once you're in a different state of consciousness, then you bring in your skills, and so we developed all kinds of techniques for refining or bringing something out or enhancing it in some kind of way. So
yeah,
that's part of the process as well too.
yeah. I love it. And yeah, and tell me a little bit, because this is your expertise. As a diagnostic tool, how did he use them in a, short, without it being a college class on the subject?
Um, he used it to elicit conversation,
Yeah, yeah,
because a lot of the people that he was in charge of this psychiatric institute that was so like it was just him and maybe two other people with hundreds of very mentally ill people, and whereas they wouldn't respond to, say, the clinician asking diagnostic questions, they wouldn't respond, they would respond to the images without him
yeah,
having to say anything.
yeah,
Even he could see just the way that their face expressed emotion or recognition, or the way their eyes changed, or the way that their hands started scratching themselves, or something, that he was like mediumistic in his own way, that somehow it
yeah,
opened up this channel of communication. It was communicative
mhm, yeah.
in that way.
And that's why I'm so open to other tools like tarot, like oracle cards, like even the I Ching, when you're, because you're still, it's still image based, right? With meaning behind images, but a picture's worth 1,000 words, right? So even though there might be sort of a basic bit of packet of information that goes with an image, it can expand almost exponentially on how how you read it. You were talking about looking at art and people not knowing how to see art or look at art, and the wording I typically use is reading art. Like, to me, it's reading.
But I'm also listening to it.
Well, yes, of course.
Yeah, yeah, reading and
Yes,
listening. And I
absolutely.
talk to it. I talk to it. I ask the art questions.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's conversation.
There's a livingness to it. You can tell the
Yeah.
difference between a dead piece of art and a living piece of art. I can't.
What do you consider dead art?
Um, that has been so eroded or fallen apart that it no longer functions in the way it was meant to function.
Yeah, interesting.
But yet, I
Like,
can still go to the Egyptian section of the Brooklyn Museum, and they have fantastic Egyptian art there that's still.
potent.
When I leave the gallery, like I have to go lie down because it's just like there's just too much and overwhelmed. And of course,
Yeah,
it's all as well as it's curated. It's just too much all crammed into a few rooms. Like
yeah,
each piece of art deserves its own room.
yeah, yeah. But some are definitely more significant in the ways that they hold conversations, I guess is maybe the right word. I don't know. Than others. Because for me, not everybody's creating necessarily. I mean, I think a lot of people do it unconsciously. They're creating inspired collaborative work and don't even know it. And those can be every bit as amazing and
Mm-hmm.
just, full of juice as people who know they're creating collaboratively and in an inspired way. But then there's art that's just practice, or it's just technique, or it's just repetition without whatever that living thing is
Yeah, it's flat.
that's embedded in the art. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it hasn't been inflated with spirit yet.
Yeah. Yeah. And so while I think anything can become an oracle, like you can have sort of a everyday oracle, right? And certainly artwork can function that way. There is some art that comes into existence as an oracle.
Mm-hmm.
And oracles can communicate, like I said, any vast amount of information, even if there's a base sort of meaning that's accepted for it.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, that's kind of, I just think that art has a capacity to do so much to ease people into spiritual expansion that maybe we often ignore.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe. I don't know. That's
Yeah,
my
well, as I
theory.
said, when I
I mean,
go
I'm thinking, yeah.
to museums or galleries, um, especially here in New York, there's thousands of people in, say, one museum, tens of thousands, and they're all just shuffling through, glancing, shuffling through. Nobody is like standing and talking to the work in front of it. I
Yeah.
was at an exhibition of some rare, very rare watercolors of Georgia O'Keeffe, and I just noticed things that just so many questions that I wanted to ask her, and I couldn't. She wasn't interested.
Oh, really? But that's true in life too, though.
Well,
Like,
she was discover like her watercolors were a discovery, and she had discovered them, and it was very early on, and but they weren't considered marketable by her agent, and talked her out of stopping the watercolors. And then the watercolors sort of got dispersed and given away as presents to people here or there. And this gallery at the Met managed to find most of them and bring them all together, which was just amazing to borrow them from people. And so
Yeah.
The way that she used water, and I don't know necessarily if it was watercolor. It might have been ink. And I finally was able to track down one of the curators, because I wanted to know like what was the medium here, and this paper that she's using doesn't make any sense to me. I've never seen anything like it. Where did she get it? They couldn't answer all these kinds of
Yeah.
things, and so I was trying to have a conversation with Georgia O'Keeffe about this, but she had kind of been so disheartened or discouraged to not use them that she didn't have the interest in them anymore, or it was hard for her to connect
Yeah.
with them.
I feel like she resisted people imposing their own meanings onto her work. Like and rather than address her that opposition, she just didn't. Like she
Well,
just didn't talk.
I could show you some of
Yeah.
her work that I found that she didn't really want to be doing. She didn't want to be painting this, but she was told to paint it. And I can show you where she made mistakes that she didn't correct. Like she didn't even like, which she was capable of making, as we all are, but she didn't have to make these artistic mistakes. But nobody, even the art historian there, wasn't aware or noticed any of this stuff. So that's what I meant. Like I just really get drawn into these things. I start having this
Yeah.
long conversation of some
Yeah.
sort, whether it's with the person who painted them or the art itself, or who knows.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Georgia O'Keeffe is one of the artists in the week that I'm going to be sharing your information. So she's one of
Also,
the
I
artists
was
I'm talking about in that week,
yeah, and
week from tomorrow.
one of my spirit mentors has been Jackson Pollock, that I've had a very deep connection with for many years
Yeah.
as well too.
Not surprising. I mean, you're not only you're in that area too. You're not far from where he was
Right, Long Island,
working all
which
the yes.
produced a lot of mediums, as did Manhattan at one time.
Yes, absolutely.
Hmm.
Absolutely. I so often I like everybody has mediumistic ability. I agree. It's just where is it in focus for them? And they don't need to be aware of it. I mean, often they are, like you said, sometimes they are. But even my husband working in the computer field that he's in, and he doesn't think that he has any kind of, you know, inspired anything in his life, but he absolutely does. In the field where he's working, he taps into ideas and ways of working quickly and in ways that other people just aren't doing.
Hmm.
And he
Hmm.
doesn't recognize it necessarily. And it's fine. It's okay
Yeah.
that he doesn't.
Hmm.
He's still contributing and adding to the knowledge of the world and the way things work and making things better for everybody, you know. Um, but I think the sensitivity of artists makes them just, prone to awareness of these things
Hmm.
because that's what draws us to do what we do.
Yeah.
So, anyway, thank you. I
You're
really
welcome.
appreciate you giving me some of your time. And I will share this all with you once I get it all said and done. For sure, the bit for the class will be done before next week, but I might take a little bit longer to do something long form for it.
Yeah,
So,
sure.
all right.
All right.
And I'll put the link to where everybody can find all of it in the video as well.
Okay. If you need anything, let me know, and let me know which
All right.
images you want, and I'll send them to you.
Okay. Sounds good.
All right.
Thank you, friend. See you
You're
later.
welcome. See you later.
Bye.